What if the strongest version of you doesn't need a gym at all? Yeah, that sounds wrong. Because everything you've been told says strength comes from weights, machines, perfectly structured programs, the whole system. But here's where it gets interesting. Inside prison, none of that exists. No equipment, no supplements, no optimized routines. And yet, men walk out stronger, tougher, more capable than people who've been training for years. So what's actually going on here? Because this isn't just about doing more push-ups or killing time. There's something deeper happening, something most people never even stop to think about. And here's the part nobody really talks about. Some prisoners don't just maintain their bodies, they completely transform them in conditions that are meant to break them. Stripped down to nothing and still getting stronger. That shouldn't work, but it does. And when you look closer, you see the truth. It's not what they have, it's how they train. And that raises a bigger question. If they can build that kind of strength with nothing, then what are you actually missing? Because by the end of this, you're going to see something most people never realize. And it might completely change how you think about training forever. This isn't another bodyweight workout breakdown. And honestly, that's where most people already get it wrong. Because what you're about to see isn't really about exercises. It's about a system. A way of training that looks simple on the surface, but underneath it's built on principles science has been pointing to for years. Progressive overload, time under tension, and frequency. Now here's the interesting part. Prisoners don't sit down and plan these things out. They're put in an environment where these principles just happen, automatically. No distractions, no skipped sessions, no waiting for motivation. It becomes routine, and routine turns into survival, and that's when progress finally starts. Because when you remove choice, you remove inconsistency, and when inconsistency disappears, your body finally adapts the way it's supposed to. But here's where it gets even more interesting. It's not just the environment that creates results. It's how that environment changes the way they train. Simple movements become brutally effective. And there's one factor most people completely overlook. Once you see it, you won't be able to unsee it. And more importantly, you can use it too. Here's what most people don't realize. Prison works because it removes your ability to choose. And yeah, that sounds limiting, but it's actually the advantage. Think about your own training. How often do you skip workouts, switch programs, or wait until you feel ready? More than you think. But inside prison, none of that exists. No distractions, no endless options. Just your body, your space, and time. And that forces something most people never experience. Consistency, without negotiation. You don't decide whether to train, you just do it. Day after day. Same movements, repeated until they improve. And over time, that builds something powerful. Because strength isn't built in one session, it's built through repetition. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most people don't lack knowledge. They lack consistency. They know what works, they just don't stick with it. Prison removes that weakness completely. But here's where it gets interesting. If consistency alone was enough, everyone doing push-ups would be strong. And that's clearly not true. So something else is happening. And this is where the system starts to reveal itself. This is where things start to shift. Because a push-up inside prison isn't just a push-up. It's a progression system. Most people think strength comes from doing more reps, more sets. But that's not it. Strength comes from doing harder. Outside, people chase numbers. Inside prison, they chase difficulty. Same movements, higher demand every time. A push-up turns into decline, then diamond, then one-arm variations. Squats become pistol squats. Pull-ups become slower, stricter, more controlled. That's progressive overload without weights. You don't need more weight, you need more challenge. And because they keep increasing difficulty, the body adapts. But here's the mistake most people make. They confuse effort with progress. They do more but not better, and that's why they plateau. Inside prison, fewer reps with higher difficulty changes everything. But even that's not the full picture, because how you perform each rep matters even more. Here's the part almost nobody pays attention to, and it might be the biggest mistake in your training. Prisoners don't just train harder, they train slower. Sounds simple, but this is where most people go wrong. Watch someone rush reps using momentum. Now compare that to someone moving slowly, controlling every inch. Same exercise, completely different result. Because strength isn't built through speed, it's built under tension. The longer the muscle works, the more it adapts. Inside prison, there's no rush. Reps become controlled, deliberate, and even basic movements become brutal. A basic push-up turns into real work. But here's the contradiction. Even people lifting heavy weights often rely on momentum. They make the movement easier, not harder. Inside prison, every rep is honest. Every movement is controlled. And that's where real strength shows up. But even this isn't the biggest advantage. This is where everything changes. Because the real difference isn't just how they train, it's why they train. Most people rely on motivation. They train when they feel like it and skip when they don't. But motivation is unreliable. Inside prison, that doesn't work. Training becomes something you rely on. It becomes identity. You're not training for looks. You're training to stay sharp, focused, in control. And over time, that builds discipline most people never reach. Then something shifts. It stops being a decision. It becomes automatic. No resistance, no overthinking, just consistent effort stacking every day. And that's powerful. But there's still one missing piece. Here's something that might sound wrong. More equipment doesn't always lead to better results. In fact, it often makes things worse. More options, more distractions, more reasons to switch before anything works. And that's where people get stuck. They keep changing instead of improving. But when you strip everything back, you get better at the fundamentals. And that's where real strength is built. Simplicity isn't a limitation, it's focus. And if this is already shifting how you think, you're ahead of most people. But here's where it gets even more interesting. This is where progress starts to compound. This is the hidden advantage almost nobody talks about. Prisoners don't rely on one long workout. They train multiple times a day. At first, it looks too simple to work. Just small sets, spread out. But this creates constant stimulation. Instead of one big signal, you send multiple signals all day. And they stack. Your body keeps adapting again and again. Strength builds, movements get cleaner, everything improves. Because you're training more often, not just harder. And here's the key. Recovery becomes easier. You're not destroying your body. You're building it gradually. Outside, people chase intensity. Inside prison, frequency drives progress. And when you combine that with consistency and control, strength doesn't just build, it accelerates. When you step back and look at everything together, a pattern appears. Prisoners aren't stronger because they have better tools. They're stronger because they follow better principles. Consistency, progression, control, frequency, simple on their own, powerful when combined. And here's the truth, you can use this too. You don't need a prison. You just need to simplify and commit. But most people won't, because they're chasing complexity when strength really comes from doing the basics again and again with intention. That's the real secret. And once you understand that, everything changes. You stop chasing and start building. Once you start thinking this way, everything shifts. You realize you were overcomplicating it. You don't need perfect conditions. You need consistency, progression, control, repetition. But here's the real question. Can you stay disciplined when you have freedom? Because that's the real challenge. It's easy when you have no choice. It's harder when you do. But that's where real growth happens. So keep it simple. Commit fully. Master the basics. Because real strength isn't built through shortcuts. It's built by showing up again and again. And once you train like that, you'll understand why the biggest transformations happen in the hardest conditions. And if this shifted how you think, don't wait. Start today.